Hello and welcome to Learn Spanish a la Boricua. My name is Carrie Brennan, and today, as with all of our even-numbered episodes, we're in episode 6 today, we're breaking down the conversation from the previous episode. In episode 5, we talked about Mujeres, Ilustres de Puerto Rico, coming off of el Día Internacional de la Mujer, International Women's Day. I had taken a tour, and our podcast episode was about that. So if you haven't listened to it, you definitely want to listen to it before this episode. And if you have listened to it, you might even want to refresh. So that as I'm going through some of the vocab and the examples of grammar and pronunciation, it's familiar to you. You have that connection of memory, helping all of these things cement a little bit more in the brain. I also thought it would be a good idea to re-listen to episode 5 after this episode as well. You will have learned a lot more of the vocab that you need, right, to be able to understand. When I was learning a little bit of German a couple summers ago, and I knew the family vocab, right, because I started on Duolingo, I then listened to an audio that was talking about describing your family, right, how many kids there were, how many Junge and Mädchen, boys or girls this couple had. So I was able to follow along that conversation, even though I was a complete beginner in German, because I knew the vocab. Right? So know that a huge part that's blocking your understanding is just having to do the long process of building your vocab up. After this episode, you will have first of all understood a lot more of the context of the episode because of how I'm going to be going through the different examples and referring back to the conversation. Also, you'll just have learned a lot more words that you'll be able to pick up in the conversation. So try listening to the last episode once more after you have been enlightened by today's episode. Okay, as always, I'm going to recommend that you view this episode on YouTube. It's really, I think, necessary from my perspective in as many years as a student in Spanish and many years as a teacher in Spanish to see a word written in order for it to help get in your brain. I know that when I'm in my conversation classes, if somebody asks for a word, I tell it to them and they haven't seen it yet. That each time they come up needing that word again, they have to ask me, what was it again? What was it again? It's so totally different. Once they see the word written, they can access it and have a little bit more confidence in, access it more from their brain and have more confidence in how they're saying it. So really think the visual piece is necessary. Hop over to YouTube. That link to view this episode in YouTube is in the podcast description. Without further ado, let's get into it. As always on our agenda, we'll be going over vocab from the episode. Don't have too much to talk about pronunciation-wise, but to something to offer. And then we'll be going over some beginner, intermediate examples of grammar, upper intermediate, and advanced. Okay, first of all, I already explained this in the intro of last episode, but let's talk about me hago un ocho. I found this picture when I put in Google hacerse un ocho to make yourself an 8, what it literally translates to. This picture came up and I thought, well, that's actually quite a good visual for what this phrase is trying to convey. As I told you guys at the beginning of the episode, in episode 5, that me hago un ocho is used here in Puerto Rico. I think it's used in other places too. From me Google searching, it looks like it's in quite a few countries. I don't know how universal, but I don't think it's just here. But it's used to get tangled up. Right, I used the example of the tour guide for the zip line park that I did once. It was all tangled up in his carabiners and ropes, or to get tongue-tied when you're speaking and you're tripping over your words. Me hago un ocho, you could say that. I asked Alfredo about it, just phoning my native friend here, native boyfriend, and he said, he also implied it could mean to get flustered, I think. So any one of these in different contexts might mean hacerse un ocho becomes to get tangled up, to get tongue-tied, to get flustered. So why hacerse? Because we're seeing the verb hacer reflexively. Remember what I've said in the other episodes. I'm not going to go in depth into every single grammar topic that one phrase contains, because otherwise this episode would be 3 hours long. You don't want that, neither do I. But I will point you to my community with my resources, a library of resources. If you like the way I explain things, if you feel like it clicks for you, then join my community. Here I have an entire library of live classes that I've done explaining many different topics in Spanish grammar. Okay, so check that out. We've already talked about reflexive verbs. I think have come up every single episode. Why? because they're that common and you really need to have that good of a grasp on them. I have 3 live classes on reflexive verbs there. So please feel free to check that out if you need more information on how the heck, why does hacer have the se on it? How does it become me hago un ocho? How does it become te haces un ocho? Ella se hace un ocho. Ellos se hacen, se hicieron un ocho, etc. Another reflexive verb while we're at it, equivocarse. I think that you guys really need to take this phrase, put it down into your vocab, and have it be something that you can come up with pretty quickly. Why? Because we are humans and we are, as not being beings of artificial intelligence, we don't always get information right. So you have to say, if I'm not mistaken. It's the human experience, if I'm not mistaken, right? Si no me equivoco, and you want to practice it so that it comes out with a nice flow. Si no me equivoco. These two are going to kind of smush together. It's not going to sound like si no me equivoco, just like we don't say if I'm not mistaken. If I'm not mistaken, si no me equivoco. All right, equivocarse means to make a mistake. To mess up. Look at this. Está bien equivocarte en tu segundo idioma. Right now I'm speaking to you. It's okay to mess up or to make a mistake in your second language. Okay? Equivocarse, a reflexive verb. Don't know what to do with them? You already know. Check out my class on reflexive verbs. Okay. If you want to see a couple examples of this equivocarse verb used so that you don't have to fumble through doing all the work, the grammar work in your mind as you're speaking, then pull these phrases that I've given to you, put them down on your vocab practice, or write them down in your notebook, rewrite them so they become second nature to you. Okay. All right, let's talk about this. I mentioned that in the tour I had heard Melina, the tour guide, mention a fire that happened in a factory. It was a garments factory. And I used the word fábrica, which is correct. I wanted to point that out here because what does it look like? It looks like fabric, and it's not. This is a false friend, a false cognate in Spanish. It looks like it should be fabric, but it's not. Una fábrica is a factory. Make sure you know that, okay? And mainly in Puerto Rico, I mainly hear tela used for fabric, referring to, me encanta la tela de esta camisa, I really do. I love this fabric. Okay. I looked up Spanish or just to double check what other words for fabric could be used. Tejido, T-E-J-I-D-O. Tejido is another one that you might see, which doesn't surprise me at all. Tejido, I think of more, maybe this is just because of my reality as a yoga teacher and needing to know anatomy. Tejido is also used as tissue, connective tissue, and tissue in the body would be tejido. So I think of it more in that context, but again, that might just be from my experience. Know that definitely tela is a safe one to use, and tejido you might want to have that in the back of your mind as well. All right, so I wanted to clarify, since I said I thought that the International Women's Day maybe came because of this massive fire that there was in a garments factory where many women died. There were many immigrant women. But that is not the whole story. That's one piece. What the reality is that El Día Internacional de la Mujer came from many fights over history, many movements, many protests, many groups of women coming around, coming together, fighting for their rights around the world. And that's why it became International Women's Day. It really was like this uprising, I think, on a global level of recognizing that women should have the right to vote, that they should have, workers' right, wage rights, etc. So I wanted to just clarify, because I didn't give the best information in the episode. I'm not a historian, I'm a Spanish teacher, but we can use this explained in Spanish so that I clarify some of my confusion about where International Women's Day came from. So, el Día Internacional de la Mujer tiene sus raíces en el movimiento obrero de mediados del siglo XIX. Okay, so it has its roots, raíces, in this workers' movement, obrero. Obrero is implying a worker. In the mid-19th century, en un momento de gran expansión y turbulencias en el mundo industrializado. As we know, the Industrial Revolution was booming. That was certainly not the shining moment in history for working conditions for people. We know that a pretty dirty period of time, and people suffered a lot in the workplace. So women, en el que la mujer comenzó a alzar cada vez más su voz. So women were starting to raise their voice, right? Alzar su voz cada vez más. You know, which literally is like each time more, but more and more. So they're more and more starting to raise their voice. Y en ese contexto, los historiadores coinciden en destacar, we're going to talk about the word destacar in just a moment, como antesala directa del Día Internacional de la Mujer, la marcha de mujeres que se vivió en Nueva York en 1908. Okay, so in this context, historians agree, coinciden is a little bit more formal way to say, to agree in highlighting as, who else we're about to get into, we'll come back to this again, antesala. So first of all, side note, you know, Alfredo is is a huge sports fan, and I knew antesala as like the pregame. I was like, this is the direct pregame to Women's International Day. I don't know. Prelude would be the other translation, okay? The prelude, don't judge my English. Okay, I know I have a lot of words floating around there. The prelude to International Women's Day was this march, right, that happened in 1908 in New York, where more than 15,000 women protested, se manifestaron para pedir menos horas de trabajo, asking for less hours of work. You're working like 14 hours a day at that point, right? Mejores salario, better salaries, y derecho a votar, and the right to vote. El año después de ello, el Partido Socialista de América declara el Día Nacional de la Mujer, que celebra por primera vez en los Estados Unidos en el 28 de febrero. So we had a National Women's Day. Okay, sometime after this march, not too far afterwards, was when the factory fire happened in the garments factory, and many immigrant women were killed. So that information was there, but this march had already happened before that event. Okay, now, and as I mentioned, this is from BBC News Mundo, BBC Noticias Mundo, okay, world news. This was happening not just in the United States, it was also in Europe. They talked about a section in this article where they're talking about what's going on in Russia as well. Like I said, really a global phenomenon, which is pretty amazing. En ese contexto, irrumpe en escena una mujer que pasaría a la historia como la impulsora del Día de la Mujer Internacional, la comunista alemana Clara Zetkin. My German pronunciation is not as good. Why? Because I haven't been practicing. I left my German journey because I decided it was going to be too confusing for my brain. All right, here's a German woman who came onto the scene, and she was going to become known as the one who pushed for this first International Women's Day. Zetkin sugirió la idea de conmemorar un Día de la Mujer a nivel global en 1910, right? She suggested this idea to commemorate a Women's Day on a global scale in 1910 at this International Women's Conference in Copenhagen. Un año después se celebra el primer Día Internacional de la Mujer, el 19 de marzo de 1911, reuniendo a más de 1 millón de personas en Alemania, Austria, Dinamarca y Suiza. Okay, that was when the first International Day was celebrated on March 19th in 1911. En 1975, la ONU, the United Nations, establece y celebra por primera vez el Día Internacional de la Mujer el 8 de marzo. Not until 1975 was the day officially named on the 8th of March, officially established the International Women's Day. Okay? So like I said, there's still more gaps. There's still a lot of things that were sort of contributing to what became International Women's Day. If you would like to learn more about it in Spanish, go check out BBC News Mundo. All right, let's go back to our vocab. Destacar, the one that I just mentioned, is what we're going to start with right now. Destacar is a great word to have to emphasize, to stress, to highlight. Not to stress as in to stress out, to stress, to emphasize. To highlight. Okay, we'll get to why this picture is here in just a minute. Mujeres Ilustres, the name of the episode. Ilustre is like distinguished. Okay, so distinguished women in history. That's what I was wanting to name in Puerto Rican history. name of the episode, right? Feminicidio, unfortunately. This is feminicide. And I don't think that, I mean, it's obvious we know that things ending inside mean the killing of, but I just don't think that this term is something that I've heard so much in English as I have in Spanish. And I think that it might be partly because of jargon and that we would say it in another way. But I think the sad reality is that this is a little bit more of something that's found in Latin America. Once I was listening to a podcast from here from Puerto Rico, and they were talking about, it was after another shooting based in racism in the United States. And they talked about how, racism is like our issue, our thing as, and the man speaking, Puerto Rican, said as domestic violence, violencia contra la mujer, and feminicidios is our problem. It's like the United States is dealing with racism and gun violence, and in Puerto Rico and in much of Latin America, it's a lot of violence against women. Okay, so I know that we would know what feminicidio or feminicide is, but I just wanted to point that out because, again, it's not a term as much, I think, that we hear in English. Alfredo mentioned that I just thought this was interesting that it said exactly the same way, that you can imply someone is behind bars. Está tras las rejas. Está tras las rejas. So he's behind bars. We already knew. We were talking about the El Moralista that killed Valeria in that moment. So we knew that the he was implied, right? Las rejas are bars. And that's why I have this image here. This is very classic of Puerto Rican construction. You'll see these rejas, these bars in front of windows, in front of maybe la marquesina, a little garage there, the driveway, in front of the front door, in front of big windows here. So rejas, very common in Puerto Rican construction. And that is largely to prevent break-ins. Okay, I want to talk about this phrase. I was really looking for what a disrespect was. And I remember trying to express that in times in the past and couldn't. It's because it's more common to use this phrase, faltar el respeto. And I think that's global in Spanish. It's not just in Puerto Rico. Faltar el respeto. So I said fue una manera de faltar el respeto de manera intencional, whatever. It was an intentional disrespect to the muralist. Okay, so faltar el respeto means to disrespect, right? Me estás faltando el respeto. Tú me estás faltando el respeto. You are disrespecting me. Okay, me estás, let's write that one down here. So you can see that. Me estás faltando el respeto. You are, see how that works? You are lacking respect to me. You're disrespecting me. A statement, I just wanted to go over this. As you might have heard in the episode, Alfredo and I kind of struggled to find a good translation for the word statement. And it's because what he said statement in English tiene mucho peso. Tiene mucho peso. It has a lot of weight. When you say a statement, it's not just like, here's your bank statement, or here's a statement they made in the press. A statement is also something that you do. It's an act that you're trying to convey something. So a statement literally translated would be una declaración. That was what I suggested. Although again, I felt like that. I know that declaración means statement, but I don't know if it means in the way of I'm trying to convey a message. I know of it as the statement from the company, las declaraciones de la compañía. The statements from the company says this, okay? Alfredo then came up with sobresalir, the way that this man wanted to stand out and to make his point, to make a statement. He wanted to sobresalir. So that might be that was a good thing we came up. I used un acto as well, sort of an act that they do. Know that sobresalir can also mean to excel, to stand out or to excel, to do well at something. For my advanced students or anyone working on the subjunctive, hold on to sobresalir in your brain because we're going to be going over that in just a second in grammar. All right. So, con razón, sorry, I've got one more here at the bottom of the slide. Con razón, a good phrase to have, it means with good reason. Y con razón, Alfredo was talking about, this the day being celebrated, the different events that are going on to make sure that this day continues to have importance and relevance because there's still more work to do. He used con razón, with good reason. Con razón can also have the feel of no wonder, you know? If someone were to say, if you have a friend who works 12-hour shifts and also has 3 little kids, and then, you know, you get together with them and she says, I'm exhausted. You could say, con razón, no wonder, right? With good reason. It still implies that, but maybe you might thought, you know, your English brain might feed you no wonder, and you'll think, how the hell do I say that? Con razón. Okay, write those down. Maybe give yourself a kind of, it's something that you feel like, I'm not sure, quite confident in how to use it. Use the example I just gave you, right? Estoy trabajando 12 horas, you know, siempre detrás de los nenes, always, you know, trying to keep up with, always behind the kids. Y estoy exhausta. I'm exhausted. Pues con razón would be your response. And if you need a little bit more context to it, that's a way you could give your brain some context. All right, guys, let's look at this. So this was the mural that I was speaking about. This is the mural originally, reconstruction that was done after Huracán María, which was painted over a deliberate falta de respeto, a deliberate lack of respect, falta de respeto hacia el muralista original, towards the original muralist, okay? They put her face over it. Soy Baco is the one who painted over this mural, ni una menos, right? Not one less, not one more, is the hashtags that will be used for this movement, unfortunately, of violencia doméstica y feminicidio. So that one really impacted me. There it is. Justicia para Vale. And like Alfredo said, it was, which was obtained because el muralista que mató a Valeria ya está tras las rejas. He's behind bars. All right. Heavy topic, and it's upsetting, but let's move on to pronunciation. So I wanted to talk about, this isn't going to be so much looking at different examples of pronunciation from the episode. I just wanted to mention something that is a reality for you and you guys should be thinking about as far as you're practicing your overall flow and how fast you can speak in Spanish. You might have also noticed it as I was just going over some of the history of International Women's Day. Speak slowly, you need to read out loud. Okay, here's what happens, friends. I want us to listen real quick to where I read out the facts about Herminia Tormes Garcia, which was not at 12:20. That was a note for it's at 17 seconds. Okay, let's listen here.
Fue la primera mujer en graduarse de la Escuela de Derecho de la Universidad de Puerto Rico en 1917. ¿Y de dónde es Herminia Tormes?
Okay, did you guys get that? It was speedy, wasn't it? Let's listen one more time. We're going to go back a little bit. Okay.
Era abogada en Puerto Rico. Fue la primera mujer en graduarse de la Escuela de Derecho de la Universidad de Puerto Rico en 1917.
Okay, so I think I was speaking pretty fast at that point. Why? Because you can read faster than you can speak, right? You cannot speak faster than you can read out loud. Let me take, I have kept this on my desk just for this reason. And I'm sure you guys have done the exact same thing that I'm about to do. Caring for leather jewelry. To restore leather brilliance, rub a small amount of ink or virgin oil onto leather. Let it firm and then polish with a clean cloth until it shines. Never wet leather. If it does get wet, wipe it off, let dry, follow some of those steps. When we're reading out loud, we can go, read so fast. You cannot speak faster than you read because your brain is having to come up with the information as you're speaking. When you're reading, you don't have to come up with shit, right? You can just practice your overall speed because you're not having to produce. Pull the vocab word from the back corner of your brain. Sort through 11 freaking conjugations as you're trying to speak, right? All of the work is done for you, and you can use the practice of reading out loud to improve your overall pronunciation, flow, and speed. When I first came to Puerto Rico, it was in October of 2020, right? Yes, wow. It was a month later that I started working in the yoga studio as a receptionist and also as a yoga teacher. What I would do is I felt like my Spanish had the hardest time generating itself in the morning. So I would be listening to a podcast from Puerto Rico while I was making my breakfast, eating my breakfast, doing the dishes. And then I would sit down and record myself reading out loud. I would read a news article from Puerto Rico, all in Spanish, read it out loud, record it on my phone, and then listen to myself. And I would do that for about 10 minutes or so. Okay. Every day, because I was struggling to get things out, to get my brain working in Spanish first thing in the morning, and people would call and ask a lot of questions, and it's harder when you're on the phone, et cetera, et cetera. So I did that every freaking morning. Listen, so that I get that my brain sort of starting to cranear, starting to work in Spanish, and also so that it helps with my pronunciation. When you have the input through your ear, it might come out better through your mouth. Right? So listen for a little bit and then record yourself reading out loud. You can give yourself a lot of feedback on pronunciation. And, if you're like, oh my gosh, that's cringy, I don't want to hear myself. Well, you think it's going to get better by not doing it? Do you think you're magically going to get better at pronunciation by not giving yourself feedback, by not practicing? No. Okay. If you're like, oh, it's cringy to listen to myself. Well, that's what other people are hearing when you speak. So why don't you work on it? Okay, my point rests. I did it for probably 3 to 5 months, pretty much every day, read out loud. I have some of the recordings still on my phone to prove it. If you have an iPhone, and I'm sure that an Android would do the same thing, you have voice notes on your phone and they can be recording in the background. So what I would do, I'm going to start recording here. Hello, it's recording me. Can you see that? There it is. Meanwhile, I can close this, open up another article. It's still recording in the top hand corner. See that? The microphone's still on. So then I can go and open up Primera Hora and read a little bit about the corozaleño Javier Figueroa se convierte en el primer boricua en ganar el Ironman 7.3 Puerto Rico. Woo! Okay. It's recording me this whole time. So you can do it right there on your phone. Look, it's been going all the time. Can you see that? 37 seconds of recording. Fabulous. Okay, I need to correct myself. I had never seen this word in Spanish before. And my English brain betrayed me because I said equidad, like equity. Equidad is what that should sound like, equidad. Why? Because QUI and QUE will never make a W sound. Think of the word querer, quiero, quieres. It's not qui. It's not quieres. It's not querer. So it's not equidad either. It should be equidad. Mala mia. I was reading. All right. That's it for pronunciation. You need to practice reading out loud. Okay, find something that if you know that in a news article is going to have 50 of the 70 words are going to be things that you've never seen before, that might not be a great place to start because it's going to be too hard for you to find a good flow in reading when you're seeing a ton of new words. Everything you come across is a new word. So find something, maybe a blog type post, or find someone's social media posts and read those out loud. Okay. But you should be recording yourself out loud as if you're wanting to get better at pronunciation, flow, and speed. All right, let's look at this fun example. I'm so excited for this one. Beginner intermediate grammar. We're going to talk about terminar in the preterite and how it implies ended up, which is something we use all the time, okay? I don't know who said this in the episode, but at some point someone said terminó siendo, which is it ended up being. Let's break that down. So terminar in the preterite. Right now our subject is it. It ended up being, so we need to conjugate that in the row, or put that in our conjugation line of él, ella, usted. Okay, that's also the it line. Like it has a lot of features, would be tiene, just like she has a dog would also be tiene. Okay, so it goes in that third person group. Here we see the verb in the preterite for it, terminó, it ended up. And then the following verb will be an ing. It ended up being, okay? Terminó siendo. We took ser and we put an ing ending onto it. Yendo. Yendo. If you need more information about how to form INGs, look up the present progressive. Let me show you this right quick. You can go to SpanishDict.com. Let's go to grammar, and I'm going to look up the present progressive. There it is. You don't even have to type in anything in. As soon as you put your cursor in the search box, it'll go right here. The present progressive is the name of the tense or the conjugation that's used for INGs. Estoy hablando, I'm speaking. The children are eating, is sleeping, is writing, are cooking, etc. Okay. Terminó siendo, it ended up being. All right. So how would you say, quiz, we ended up going? You need we ended up, we, past tense, terminar, just the same as present tense. And then you need going from ir. Have you come up with terminamos yendo? I hope you did. Terminamos is we ended up. Yendo is coming from the verb ir. This is how you turn the verb ir into ing. It becomes yendo. Yendo. Terminamos yendo. One more. How would you say I ended up leaving early? I'm going to say use the verb salir for right now. I ended up leaving early. I ended up getting out early. I ended up leaving early. Now you need to put terminar in the preterite for yo, and leaving needs to be ing. Did you say terminé saliendo temprano? I'm so proud of you. I ended up leaving early. Terminé saliendo temprano. I ended up. Here's leaving, salir, and ing, and there's early. That's a great construct to have grammatically. So give yourself a couple examples, like I did today. Terminó siendo, it ended up being da, da, da. Terminamos yendo, we ended up going, da, da, da. You finish that with a, right? Or you follow that with a. Terminamos yendo a la casa de un amigo. We ended up going to my friend's house. How would you say, all right, I wanted to read that. Terminé saliendo temprano. So I ended up leaving something. I ended up loving it. That'll be a little bit more complicated because of encantar. Pero sí. All right, give yourself some examples to practice on your cards. Oops, error. Grammar correction for Carrie B. Besides saying equidad, I also dropped some prepositions where you can't. I was saying that the other part, not just women being viewed as fragile, the other thing that's a problem is them being viewed as property, as belonging to men. So I use the example of after a couple breaks up, and I said luego una pareja se deja, that means later a couple breaks up. I meant to say after. So luego de que is just like saying después de que. Después de que una pareja se deja. After a couple breaks up, if the man still thinks that she is like his property and then is jealous because maybe she's with somebody else, that's where we can get into problems, right? So luego de que is exactly like saying después de que. They're both saying after. After a couple breaks up. There's a whole lesson I could do just on después de que. They all have slightly different needs grammatically following those phrases. Is that for another day? I just got beeped at to hurry up. So, all right, moving on to intermediate grammar. Passive voice, just wanted to talk about this, highlight another time. I corrected myself in the episode on this. With this particular one. Okay, let's talk about the passive voice. So we're going to be using ser to form the passive voice in the examples that I'm about to go over now. So when I first was talking about going on the tour that we started on Calle Isabel, que tiene nombre de mujer, que fue nombrado, is what I said, por la reina Isabel. Why does it have to be fue nombrada? Because I'm talking about la calle, and la calle is feminine. So it needs to be la calle fue nombrada. The thing was, this is where you'll get mixed up with masculine and feminine. I had not just said la calle. I said, caminamos la calle Isabel, que tiene nombre de mujer, que fue nombrado. And by that point, my English-speaking brain had lost the connection to la calle, that I'm speaking about a feminine thing, that we're walking the street, its name is Isabel, that was named for a woman that was named. I have to make named match the thing that's being named. Masculine and feminine never stop sucking. Fue nombrada, it was named la calle. All right, let's look at some other examples of ser in the passive voice. So, los criminales fueron arrestados. The criminals were arrested. So it sounds like was named, were arrested, was written by, was painted. La pared fue pintada por un muralista. Why do I have pintada here instead of pintado? Why do I say la pared fue pintada? Because la pared is feminine, right? What if I was saying the car was painted? What would it sound like? El carro fue pintado. I'm describing the car being painted, so it needs to be masculine. Why is los criminales fueron arrestados? Why is that like that? It's masculine and plural. We're talking about criminales. This needs to be masculine and plural. La pared fue pintada por un muralista. It was painted by a muralist. Ella es considerada. She's considered. Why is it feminine? Because we're talking about ella. You get it? Oops. Los libros son escritos para niños. Or esos libros son escritos para niños. Those books are written for kids. Okay, so I just wanted to give you, we're seeing it both used. Passive voice is going to be happening either in they were or it was. Okay, so it's either going to be fue or fueron, or in present tense, es or son. Right? You talk about yourself in passive voice. Yo fui nombrada. I was named. Los criminales fueron arrestados. Okay, so we've got fueron, fue, es, and son. I just want to give you examples of those and what constitutes one or the other. Right here, we're talking about plural things, so it needs to be fueron. We're talking about a singular thing, it needs to be fue. Ella is singular, right? Ella es, esos libros son, plural. And one more for my intermediate students, which is how Spanish views accidents, okay? So Alfredo says in this episode, se me escapa el apellido, hablando de Valeria. So se me escapa el apellido, her last name escapes me. This one, it's not so strange for us to think about because that's how we would say it in English, right? Her last name is the one that's doing the action. Her last name escapes me, and that's what it looks like in Spanish. El apellido se me escapa el apellido. Okay. Se me escapa is how you would say it escapes me, se me escapa. A good one to have, it escapes me. This is just like it should ring a bell for you for se me olvida. It's the same construct of it's forgotten from me, all right? In English, it's very much an I-centered language, okay? I am 32 years old. I am hungry. I am sleepy. Like all of these things are my identity, my age and my feelings and things that are physical states that are passing. We all say I am. And we also love to say I did something even when we didn't really do it, even when it was an accident. Let's look at a couple examples. We say I forget. And the idea in Spanish is that you didn't intentionally do the action of forgetting. You weren't the one saying, you know what, I'm going to choose to forget right now. It's the same way that gustar is set up. You're not doing the liking. It's that something is pleasing to you. It's a more passive way of looking at things. All right, let's look at se me rompió el brazo. Se me rompió el brazo is my arm broke or was broken. Okay, the arm broke. That's the one doing the action here. Because how would romper sound if it was yo? Rompí. That would be I broke, but that's not how it's seen in Spanish. Did you go out and take a hammer and we're like, pa, pa? pa until the bone broke? No, you didn't choose to do the action of breaking your arm. You weren't the one responsible for breaking your arm. You fell and your arm broke or something, right? We look at it like I broke my arm, even though I was not the one who deliberately decided to break my arm. In Spanish, wouldn't be said like that. That sounds insane. It sounds like you tried to go out and break your bone. This is that it happened. It was an accident. The bone broke. Let's look at, I dropped the cup. Did you go like this? I can't do this one because you don't know, listen to one of these metal ones. Did you go like this? I actually released my grip and purposefully dropped something onto the floor. No, you didn't. It fell from you. Most of the time you're holding on to something and it slips, or I accidentally knocked it over. I didn't intentionally do these things. It happened. The glass slipped out of my hands it slipped out of my hands is the closest thing we have to giving ourselves a little bit of a break on freaking accidents, okay? Spanish sees it like the glass fell from me. It slipped out of my hands, okay? The cup dropped from me. I dropped the cup is how we say that, right? So se me escapa el apellido is an easy one to see the connection because we would say the same thing too. Her name escapes me. The name of the movie escapes me. It's the name or it's her last name or whatever, the thing that's escaping. But in these other ones, it's harder for our English brain to maybe come up with this naturally because we think of everything like I forget, I broke my arm, I dropped the cup. And that's not how accidents are seen in Spanish. And finally, the subjunctive. I'm going to continue to give you examples in the subjunctive. I know it's not people's favorite subject, but you really need to learn it because it's so dang common. And you'll see that in an example that I have here. So I told you guys that to hang on to the verb sobresalir. If you consider you're going to put yourself into advanced grammar and talk about the subjunctive, right? We already know from other episodes, para que always triggers the subjunctive afterwards. Don't know what the heck the subjunctive is, and you feel like, okay, I'm intermediate in Spanish. I need to be facing this thing. Well, luckily for you, I have a live class on the subjunctive in my Spanish resource library. Where is it? When you use the subjunctive. And I really liked my live class there, so that might help you. Reading things on the subjunctive is hella confusing. Right? Reading things about grammar does not help a lot of the time. Having it explained to you, seeing examples, etc., is a much better way to introduce yourself to this wild world of the subjunctive. Para que su palabra sobresalga is what Alfredo was saying when we finally got to how the hell we're going to say a statement. Salir, right? How do we get here? Well, you're just going to treat this like you would treat the verb salir, because that's what we're working with here. In the subjunctive, you have to put the verb in yo form first. Salir turns into salgo, and then you add on its subjunctive ending, which is kind of like treating er, ir verbs like ar verbs, and vice versa. So this is salga, sobresalga is how we ended up getting there. So that his word or his statement stands out. Para que su palabra sobresalga. And I have one more that I wanted to share with you for subjunctive. This is the way that if you are going to be using Spanish daily in your life, this is the most common way that you will use both para que and cuando are going to be the most common ways that you will use the subjunctive. I hate when people make the subjunctive a different, whether it's a book, whether it's a course, a teacher, whatever, make the subjunctive seem like this airy-fairy thing that you only use to talk about aliens and zodiac signs and blah, blah, blah. No, you need it every time you're going to say when, referring to a future event, as in when I get home, when I get off of work. How many times are you going to friggin' say that? Every single day. When I get home, I'll give you a call. I don't know. I got to check when I get home. When I get home is in the subjunctive, because when you're referring to a future unknown event, these are called conditional outcomes in the world of subjunctive grammar, then you have to use the subjunctive, okay? So the thing is that you need to differentiate between when the word when is used for habitual actions versus when you're using it to refer to a point in the future. Example. Sorry, I think a mosquito is biting me. When I go to the beach, I always look for a shady spot. Is that a habitual or am I referring to a future action? When I go to the beach, I always look for a shady spot. That's habitual, correct? I always do it. That does not trigger the subjunctive, just a regular old statement. I'm just telling y'all what I do when I go to the beach. When I go to the gym, I like to be in the big kind of CrossFit fit looking area. When I go to the gym, I like to be in the CrossFit area. Is that future or habitual? Habitual, correct. When Alfredo gets off of work, he usually goes and sees his mom and his brother real quick before coming home. Is that habitual or future? Habitual. None of those things trigger the subjunctive. Okay, let's listen to the example that I used in the episode. When I do the class about this conversation, I'm going to share the mural. That time I was referring to a future when. Why? Because I hadn't done the class yet. I'm doing this now, right? We recorded that a week ago. When I do this class, I will share. So usually the second thing's going to be in future tense. When I get home, I'll have to check. Okay, I'll check when I get home. You can also say that. I'll check. That would all be I'll in English. Always you're referring to a future thing afterwards. Okay. How about when I go to Spain? I'm going to visit Madrid, definitely. And I'll see what other places I'd like to go to. When I visit Spain, I'm going to go to Madrid and for sure, and I got to think about what other cities. Is that habitual or future? Future, therefore it has to be subjunctive. Cuando visite a España. Okay. Cuando haga la clase. Cuando llegue a casa, when I get home. Te llamo. Te verifico. I'll double check like that. Okay. So know that that is one of your most common ways that you will be using the subjunctive day to day when you become bilingual. Gracias. Gracias. Thank you so much for listening. As always, follow me on social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Instagram, I just said that like Spanish. TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at Carrie B, KERYBE_. The link to follow me is there in the description. And also I wanted to mention here with these lovely 5 stars, if you like what I'm doing, if you value the information that I'm giving, if you think that I'm doing a good job here for free, do me the kindness of giving this podcast a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. I think you can leave a review in Spotify as well. I only have Spotify so that I could share the link to these shows on Spotify. Otherwise, I am a YouTube premium gal and listen to Apple Podcasts. So in the places where you can leave reviews or give a thumbs up, please do that to help my podcast get out there to more people and to let me know that you like the work that I'm doing here. I appreciate it very much. As you know, if you want to jump into my community, have access to that full resource library of classes, you will be able to do so also in the link tree, which is in the description there, where I share the link to sign up for the community, as well as doing some one-on-one coaching if you're interested in that. So check that out. Thanks so much, and we'll see you en la próxima.